In episode 15, the Mazone didn't just attack the Arcadia. They took the one person on that ship the story couldn't afford to lose. And that scene never aired in the West. What we're covering, the 1978 original, what it actually showed, what was removed before Western audiences ever saw a frame, and why episode 15 permanently changes what this show is about. The Earth's government in this show wasn't a background detail. It was a corrupt institution actively choosing extinction over inconvenience. The Mazone weren't just an invading force. They were the reckoning a civilization had already decided to stop fighting. And the version Western audiences received had both of those ideas quietly removed. What was left was the cape and the skull and crossbones, and none of the grief underneath. If the gap between what shows were packaged as and what they actually were is your thing, subscribing means you get the real version of these stories, not the one the networks decided you could handle. Let's talk about the world the show was set in, because nothing about it was built to make you feel safe.
Looks like they're on manual flight. Must be quite the ace.
Section 1. What the show really was. There's this version of space pirate Captain Harlock that everyone knows about. Picture 1978. Someone's in a meeting room, sliding promotional stills across the table. A caped space pirate, a skull and bones flag, a sleek black warship cutting through space, alien invaders, laser battles. It looks like Star Wars if Star Wars had been animated on a Saturday morning budget and marketed to kids who just figured out that space could be cool. That's the pitch. That's what showed up in syndication guides and on toy packaging. Created by Leiji Matsumoto, the series launched in Japan in 1978 with a premise that practically sold itself. The year is 2977. Earth sits at the center of this vast interstellar empire, and then the Mazone arrive. A race of plant-based alien warriors who claim Earth as their ancient ancestral home. Enter Harlock, outlaw, rebel, space pirate operating from a ship called the Arcadia, flying a flag that means one thing clearly: this man answers to no one. From a marketing perspective, that's a hero. Clean and simple. You could put him on a lunchbox, probably did. But here's what the packaging didn't tell you. Captain Harlock was, at its actual core, a series about a civilization that had already chosen to die. The Earth of 2977 isn't a thriving empire defending itself heroically. It's a society so bloated with comfort and corroded by corruption that it literally cannot bring itself to care that it's under attack. The government knew about the Mazone. They buried it. They dismissed it. They punished people who raised the alarm. The series doesn't treat this as a plot twist you're supposed to gasp at. It's an indictment. The show is genuinely interested in what happens when the institutions meant to protect a civilization become more invested in preserving their own power than the people they govern. It's interested in environmental neglect, in human complacency, in the way a society can die, not all at once, but so gradually that nobody notices until it's already gone. Harlock doesn't fight because he believes in victory. He fights because someone has to. And the series makes no promises, none, that it's going to matter. The tone throughout is melancholic, existential. It refuses to soften things. Characters die. Not off-screen, not implied or discussed later. They meet endings the show refuses to walk back. This wasn't an adventure show with dark edges. The darkness was the point. Everything else, the space battles, the cape, the flag, was the window dressing, sitting on top of a genuinely bleak philosophical statement about humanity and its own survival. So how did something this heavy get positioned as Saturday morning entertainment? The honest answer is very carefully, and with a lot of faith that the visuals would do most of the work while the voice acting and editing could sand down the edges. Japanese animation imported to American markets in the late 1970s and early 1980s went through a specific kind of transformation. Dialogue got rewritten, scenes got cut or rearranged. Networks' standards and practices teams flagged content as problematic, and scenes that suggested real consequences for real characters got either softened or removed entirely. The goal was clear. Make this feel like a standard adventure story. Make it safe. Make it comfortable. Make it the kind of thing you could air at 10 a.m. on a Saturday without a single parent complaint. But here's the thing about a show's DNA. It's harder to edit out than a script is. Some of what they left in, or couldn't find a clean way to remove, landed in living rooms across America with full force anyway. That's where the real conversation starts.
It looks that way. I hope she's all right.
I don't think she's the kind of woman who'd be so easily defeated.
Section 2. The Moments. A government that chose ignorance. In what you might have seen on American television, Earth's government was basically a passive obstacle. Ineffective, maybe. Bureaucratic in that comedic way where incompetence was the joke. but not actively evil in any way that demanded confrontation. The focus stayed on the action, on Harlock and the Arcadia and the cool stuff, while the government was just there. The original series is much more direct about what that government actually was. They weren't just ineffective, they were complicit. They received intelligence about the Mazone threat and suppressed it. They persecuted anyone who spoke the truth. The show frames Earth's ruling class as an entity that had confused its own continuation with the survival of the species. And those two things, in this universe, have nothing to do with each other. This isn't window dressing, it's the whole foundation. Harlock isn't fighting for the government and against the Mazone. He's fighting against both, because both represent different flavors of the same civilizational failure. One wants to destroy Earth, the other already did, slowly, through neglect and deliberate dishonesty. Watch it now, and that government doesn't read as fictional villainy, it reads as pattern recognition. That's a different kind of uncomfortable than any space battle generates. What does it mean when the story's most believable antagonist isn't the alien army, it's the bureaucracy? When the people technically on your side are more dangerous than the invaders? That's not a question adventure shows usually ask.
You already know what we've got on our shuttle from your scan.
A world that stopped caring about itself. The broadcast version, the one that reached American audiences, showed Earth as a place worth saving, a home. A world filled with people who needed Harlock and his crew, a home worth fighting for. Matsumoto's Earth is something different. It's a civilization in terminal decline, and the series is explicit about why. Environmental ruin, spiritual exhaustion, a population so insulated by empire that it lost any meaningful connection to its own survival instincts. The planet isn't being stolen from thriving, heroic people. It's being reclaimed from a species that arguably stopped deserving it long before the Mazone even arrived. What separates Captain Harlock from every other space opera of its era is this: the stakes aren't just physical. It's not, we have to save the planet. The stakes are existential and self-inflicted. Harlock's real tragedy is that he's fighting for people who, on some level, have already surrendered. They've given up. They've decided their comfort matters more than their survival, and they're okay with that trade-off. Think about that. The hero is a man whose defining characteristic is absolute refusal to give up, fighting on behalf of a civilization that already has. That's not a Saturday morning premise. That's something considerably darker and more honest about what resistance actually looks like when nobody else cares.
Sure are pretty selfish. The Space Patrol wasted no time in leaving us behind.
The cost paid in crew. In adventure animation of that era, crew members existed to look impressive in formation and maybe get thrown back by an explosion. Nobody you were supposed to care about was ever in real danger. The formula was solid and reliable, and everybody understood it. Captain Harlock breaks that formula deliberately and repeatedly. The series makes clear that the struggle against the Mazone carries real, irreversible costs. Throughout the show, crew members meet tragic endings, not as abstract background losses, but as losses that register, that accumulate, that change the emotional weight of every subsequent scene. The Arcadia doesn't sail through this story unscathed. It carries grief. The ship has a weight to it by the middle of the series that it didn't have at the beginning. When a show is willing to let its recurring characters not make it, your relationship with every other character transforms. Every scene becomes slightly more dangerous. Every goodbye carries additional weight. The show earns its melancholy rather than performing it. Do you remember watching ensemble cast shows as a kid and instinctively knowing that the named characters would always survive? That was the unspoken contract. Harlock was one of the few series that trained you out of that assumption without you realizing it was happening. By the time you understood what the show was actually doing, some of the people you cared about were already gone.
So why did Mime suddenly disappear from that room?
She said that the bandits were about to steal the Rhine gold.
Esmeralda's loss. In stories involving younger, vulnerable characters in action-adventure animation, there was always a safety net. A child in danger was a plot device, a narrative complication, but not a victim. Not really. The contract was clear. The world is fundamentally safe, and the story's job is to prove it. Captain Harlock breaks that contract. Esmeralda's younger sister, someone we cared about, succumbed to illness. Not to a Mazone attack or some action sequence catastrophe, to illness. And the series depicts this without any of the mechanisms that usually exist to reassure the audience. No last-minute rescue, no intervention from the heroes, no action-adventure resolution. Just a quiet, devastating death that belongs to reality more than it belongs to the adventure narrative. Death by illness in a space opera is a different category of loss than death in battle. Battle deaths carry their own narrative logic. They're the cost of conflict, part of the world the show constructed. An illness just arrives, without warning, without villain, without anyone to blame. It takes exactly who it takes. That's not an adventure story beat. That's grief, written plainly. And it happened in an episode aimed at young viewers. What kind of show does that? One that decided somewhere in its development that honesty mattered more than comfort. You can disagree with that choice, but it's a choice almost no shows came close to making.
But I was of no use, and the gold was taken from this place.
Yuki in episode 15. Anchor moment. Throughout the series, Yuki occupies a specific role in the emotional architecture. She is warmth in a cold narrative. She's the thing that softens Harlock's isolation, the presence that gives the audience something to hold on to in a story otherwise defined by bleakness and loss. If you've been watching with any hope that the show will ultimately pull back, that its darkness is aesthetic rather than sincere, Yuki represents that hope. In episode 15, Mazone's shadow plant, that hope dies. Yuki meets a tragic end at the hands of the Mazone. There is no softening of the event in the original broadcast. She is there, she matters, and then she is gone. The series does not immediately cut to action or distraction. It sits with the loss. It lets you sit with it too. This is the scene that reframes everything that came before. Because if you've made it this far into Harlock and kept some part of yourself believing that ultimately this was going to resolve like a normal adventure story, that the show would pull back from the brink, episode 15 removes that belief, cleanly, without apology. Yuki's death isn't framed as motivation for Harlock's next battle. It's framed as consequence, a real one. Belonging to a universe the show spent 15 episodes insisting does not protect its people from reality. The Mazone take her not because she was foolish or made a mistake or was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They take her because in the universe this show inhabits, the Mazone can take her. Full stop. That specific moment, that scene in episode 15, earns the entire philosophical project of the series. Everything building toward it was constructing the argument. Everything after sits in its shadow. The show proved what it meant.
The ancient darkness.
The same fate cannot be repeated.
Section 3. What it means now. Here's what changes when you watch Captain Harlock with all of this in context. There's the version everyone knows, a space adventure with a cool protagonist and alien invaders and a skull and crossbones flag flying from a very impressive spaceship. That version is real. It exists. The cape is still incredible. But the show Leiji Matsumoto actually made was something more ambitious and more uncomfortable. It was a series using the language of space opera to ask questions that space opera doesn't usually ask. Questions about what civilizations owe themselves. About what happens when people in power choose convenience over survival. About whether heroism means anything in a universe that doesn't guarantee heroic outcomes. The characters who didn't make it weren't narrative mistakes. They were arguments. Each loss was the show making its case, episode by episode. The costs are real. The stakes aren't rhetorical. Harlock's defiance exists against a backdrop of genuine, irreversible tragedy. What does the way this show was edited and repositioned tell us about American television in the late 1970s and early 1980s? It tells us that there was a specific idea of what a children's property was supposed to do. It was supposed to be safe, aspirational, structured so that you went to bed with the right feeling rather than the honest one. There's a particular kind of kid who watched Captain Harlock and came away feeling like something was different about it. Heavier, less resolved, more real somehow, without being able to name exactly why. That feeling was accurate. The show was doing something its packaging wasn't advertising. It was treating your emotional engagement seriously. It was honoring your investment with honesty rather than protecting it with formula. That's rare in any era. Space pirate Captain Harlock was, underneath the striking visuals and the skull and crossbones mythology, a series about a civilization failing itself, and one man choosing to resist that failure with full knowledge that resistance might not be enough. They tried to give you the cape and the spaceship and leave out the grief. Whether protecting young viewers from Yuki's fate in episode 15, from Emeralda's loss, from the accumulated weight of every crew member who didn't come back, whether that was an act of kindness or an act of underestimation, that's a question worth sitting with. Which of these moments hit you hardest? Which one changed how you see the show? Tell me in the comments.